wait a minute, I back up, rewind that tape. Jean Gilbert has been such a faithful volunteer about these history hunters lunches and has really worked for a couple of years. And she was asking us to get some little things together for prizes for these trivia contests. And we showed her one thing and Jen went, wow, that's really nice. I really like that. And Jean so rarely says things about things that she would like to have, and we searched for a gift to give to her. So as soon as we heard her say that, our minds went, oh, we're giving that to her. So Jean, this is a small thing to say thank you for all of the work that you have done for us, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's a picture of Somerset with his name, James Whitcomb Riley's poem in the back. So,
amongst the hills of Somerset. And I'll have to watch this or Trula will take it.
Okay, if she gets enough questions right, there is another smaller version of it that we put up here. Now Jean is going to talk about exactly what we're going to do today. So thank you, Jean, really so much.
I assume you've all finished your questions. How many of you was born in Wabash County and have lived most of your life here? Okay, by the time you're done with this today, we'll know how much you really know about Wabash County. This started out with the idea of when Ron Woodward, the county historian, told me that, you know, the county's 175 years old and nobody's doing anything. Well, I sat on that for several weeks trying to figure out what we could do. So today, this is the accumulation of that several weeks and months of thought. So we have a table, items from all over the county. And so whoever gets 25 questions right, you get your choice of gift. So as soon as Pete and Heather give their program, we'll do the quiz. And at that time, I'll tell you some different things that's up there so you can kind of make up your mind. I just know Trula wants the poem. So that's it. So what happened to Tracy?
She'll be right back.
Be right back.
Okay. She didn't tell me I had to fill in for her. Well, while we wait on her, then I'll just go ahead and talk about this. We have, I'll start with Liberty Township. Now I don't want to do that because I'm giving away too much information. Anyway, we have honey. This, I was told, Brian told me, this is key to the city, but it's North Manchester, so it's not a city, it's a county. And we have things from City Hall, we have some things from the museum, and other small communities in the county. So surely you can find something that you would enjoy to take up. And she's back.
Yes.
You want to do your introduction now?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. This afternoon we have Pete Jones, which I'm sure most of you, all of us know Pete, and read his column in the Plain Dealer. And he's going to talk for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then Heather Allen, who is in the research area here in the museum, will fill in with information. When I talked to Heather about this program, I said, I'd like to have something that talks about how the government, as loose as it was at that time, how they came to survey, how they decided where state lines were, county lines were, etc. So that's how it all came out. I haven't heard him talk, so I don't know what we're going to do. First on today is Pete Jones.
Well, if she's not certain what I'm going to talk about, I'm not either. I will ask someone, I'll ask Jean to keep track of how long I've been up here. So, when we got to 10 minutes, Jean?
Brian will do it because I don't have
somebody jump up and down. Now, if you're worried about this quiz, I have the answers right here on my curtain. Come see me if you got something.
With your $10 bills?
I was asked to talk about surveying in Wabash County. This came up just last week, and I realized I could not do that without a trip to Indianapolis. And there wasn't time for a trip to the state archives in Indianapolis. And what I hope will happen here is that maybe Gene will invite me back sometime to History Hunters when I will talk about surveying in Wabash County. But seriously, it does take a trip to Indianapolis because that's where the records are for this. But let me tell you in general about pioneer survey, because the same situations would have applied here. The rectangular survey, which is most visible to us, I think, when we fly over the Midwest, how the land is laid out in squares, it's truly remarkable. While it was not Thomas Jefferson's idea, he advocated it and he pushed for it, and Congress agreed. The basic laws for the rectangular survey were passed in 1784 and 1785. And the government moved very quickly because on September the 30th, 1785, Thomas Hutchins, the first Surveyor General of the United States, landed on the north bank of the Ohio River at precisely the point where Pennsylvania-Ohio line is. And he set the stake into the ground at that point, and using very basic survey instruments and a crew of about 5 or 6 people, he began a rectangular survey of the United States. Now, you can go to that spot today. I have been there. But if I can convince my wife it's worth a trip, all we're going to find at that spot today is a cement loading dock for a company called the Bell Transport Company. And that's where barges are unloaded for distribution of steel-making products to the Pittsburgh area. But to me, it would be worth the trip. I don't know if I can give Susan a hand to go on this myself. But there it all started on September the 30th in 1785. And over the next 125 years or so, 3 million square miles of America was surveyed in that manner. Now, the South is not surveyed in that manner. Nor is New England. Anything east of Mountains really is not surveyed in that manner. But land titles are chaotic in the other parts of the country. But here they are simple. I think that I have no knowledge of mathematics, but I think that this system is so simple that anybody in this room could learn in 45 minutes how to apply it. And with that knowledge, you could locate any plot of land west of the mountains and north of the Ohio River, down to a plot as small as 40 acres with absolute preciseness. And that's the beauty of it. And that allowed the government to protect land titles around here and to allow people to buy that land, and that gave government the income received. So it is a wonderful, wonderful system. We still use it today. But the story about how this was done is absolutely fascinating, and yet it is basically unknown. Very little really has been written about how these surveyors went about their jobs. They came out here into the wilderness. They got here ahead of most other people, except for the Native Americans. And with crews of 4 or 5 or 6 people, depending upon where they were and what obstacles they had to contend with, they surveyed what was then absolute wilderness. They came into the area usually in the fall once the trees were shorn of their leaves because they needed to establish sight lines here in the forested area. anytime after the 2nd of October is private survey time. If they tried it in the summer, they had to cut the limbs off too many trees to get that line of sight. And the worst thing about it was the insects. You read the notes that these people have, and they complain about insects. I looked at some field notes one time years ago in Indianapolis. I was going through the original documents that a surveyor carried over in Grant County. And these were hand-made documents about so wide and about so long. And they kept the notes of what they had seen and what they had done. And there, between 2 pages, was the imprint of a mosquito. Now, I know what happened. They were seated by the campfire at the end of the day, and this man had these notes on his knee. He was writing because they were just that long. And one of these multitude of mosquitoes landed there, and he went like that. And I was looking at it 50 years later. Now that's longevity for a mosquito. But the obstacles that they encountered, the difficulty that they had, there is a true story in all of this. They weren't all honest. There were scoundrels out there. Some of those surveyors cheated. They didn't make the full surveys. Most of them got caught, by the way. But the wonderful thing to historians is that these survey notes give us our only true, one of our few true glimpses of what the land was like before settlement. You could go to Indianapolis, which I've not done, but I will, and you could find what your property looked like in about 1810 or 12. The survey in Indiana began in 1803 along the Ohio state line, and it was completed by 1834. That's remarkably fast, I think. And of course, the survey made better time over in the western part of the state where the timber was not as thick. It made slower time. In the south, where it was hilly. They did it all with remarkable accuracy. A transit, a compass, a chain, brass chain, made of limbs, 66 feet long. They had this crew that I described earlier. Let's see if I can keep track of them. They had a man to run the transit. Help me count here. They had a man who ran the transit for the surveyors and students that we see. They had 2 men who ran the chain. They had a man called an axeman whose job was to cut down small trees that were in the line of sight or to whack limbs off other trees. Most of the crews had a cook, and sometimes they had an extra man who was a called a wrangler. He looked at the horses. They went out in all sorts of weather. They would come in to some base camp early, about at first snowfall, usually, or when the weather got really tough. I don't think they would have been out in the weather like we've had the last 3 weeks. That was asking too much. But then they'd be at it again as soon as spring came. When the leaves came on the trees, they would withdraw, and they would go to the nearest settlement, usually, and work through the summer, making their maps and recording their field. You can go to Indianapolis. I've got 2 quick stories. How am I doing on time? Anybody keeping track of it?
You got about a minute.
All right. One of the most remarkable stories, or the thing that brought this home to me, I was at an Oregon Trail conference in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, almost 25 years ago. One of the people at this conference had come from England. He wanted to fly. He was a pilot. He wanted to fly over the Oregon Trail from Independence, Missouri, out to the Pacific Coast. He brought his own airplane. It was a bi-wing open cockpit, but he had a disassembled, he must have had a lot of money. He had a disassembled in England, shipped here, put together again in New Jersey. And I said, what's the most remarkable thing you've seen so far? And I will never forget this. He said, over the Appalachian Mountains and over interstate Ohio. He said, suddenly all this opened out in front of me, this checkerboard system that we've all seen from the air. And he said, there's nothing like that here. He said, I didn't know I was going to find that. And that has stuck with me for a long, long time. The other thing I want to tell you is that if you do go to Indianapolis, ever, if you look up your own property on this system, ask for the original field notes. Now, the first time they won't give them to you. I went down there a number of years ago. This is where I found the Grant County things. And I went to the Berlin State Library. I guess they're still there. And young guy was working at the desk. And I went up to him and I said, I'd like to see some of the original field notes. I don't care where. Oh, he said, you can't see those. You can use the microfilm machine. Use those copies. So I went over using the microfilm. They changed people on the desk. I thought, well, I'll try this next person. I went over and I said, okay, I'd love to see the original documents. Oh, we can't take those out unless you're a bona fide scholar. Obviously, I'm not. So I went back to the microfilm machine, and then he left for lunch. And here came somebody who looked like everybody's grandmother. And I went over and I said, I would love to hold one of those original field notebooks, field notes. She said, no problem. If you're persistent and you pick out somebody who looks like everybody's grandmother. Now, I hope I might be back to talk about Wabash County, because I'll tell you what, after I do that, I'll tell you what parts of Wabash County look like before any settlers were here. Thank you.
Well, I can finish that up with, if you want to know more about the surveying of Wabash in particular, I find it interesting. You can go into what they call the Colonel Hand-Track reports. Colonel Hand-Track at the time was sent here to survey Wabash and other adjoining counties. And he talks in detail at the turn of the 1800s of what he saw in Wabash. And what he would do is he came with his scouts. He would send the scouts forward and they would give the okay that it was fine to traveling through. And one particular account in Hand-Track reports being on top of Hanging Rock and the beauty that he's seen during that in history. So it's a great read if you're interested in learning more about how we came to be what we are today because of his efforts fighting through Indian territory and just knowing that it was really important to just push through this part of the West. They called us. So it's a really good read if you delve into it more in detail. But surveying could really not have happened without negotiation. And we have it documented about the treaties in the Wabash County history books, and I compiled something just to give us a better understanding of how we are where we are today in the county. So I will read from my research about the treaties in Wabash. One of the most important treaties the Indians and the U.S. government to open white settlement in the Midwest occurred at the end of East Market Street, just east of the museum, in 1826. So its importance, we must travel back in time further than the act itself of the treaty. In In the early 1820s, southern Indiana had been pretty well settled by the white men, but very few settlers inhabited the northern part of the state. Here the land was saturated with Miami Potawatomi Indians. They were free to hunt, to pray, to live, and to govern themselves as they saw fit. The pressure of the white man to come into this territory was creeping upon them faster than they could control. Bloodshed had already happened into this land, and there had to be some kind of agreement if we were all going to live together in harmony. More fallen victims would add to the great numbers already made in vain if they were not going to do this treaty. The power of these great tribes in our area had been pretty well broken by the defeat of General Anthony Wayne along the Maumee in 1794 and William Henry Harrison in 1811. Local arrangements for this treaty were left to the commissioners, specifically John Tipton. John Tipton, Colonel Tipton, wanted a centrally located place in the state, well away from any settlement that was already going on, but with a mixture of natural elements as possible. A letter written by him to Governor Ray at the time discloses its description, and I read, "I have selected a place to hold the meeting at a fine spring on the northwest bank of the Wabash, about 12 miles above the mouth of the Mississippi River. This spring was sufficient to meet the needs of around 3,000 people. New structures were being built for the accommodations of the commissioners, and Congress voted for $15,000 to be applied for this treaty. Provisions had to be met. Feasting consisted of 40,000 of fresh beef, 10,000 pounds of pork, and 250 barrels of flour, not whiskey. There were liberal rations, but they thought that whiskey was not a good additive, considering that whiskey would spur the decision making. During the treaty openings, Governor Ray spoke first. He convinced the Indians that their land was becoming useless to them, that times were changing and that they must sell their lands and leave their ancestral. The understanding was that some of the tribes did not quite understand what they were agreeing to, but signed their X anyways. They wanted a better life. The negotiations lasted through the better part of October. As a result of this treaty, the Indians ceded most of their lands in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. By the treaty with the government, the natives were stripped of their titles, consisting of 81,880 acres left to them of nearly 1 million acres prior to this negotiation. The tribes received $31,040 in goods to be paid for by the U.S. government if the treaty were to be ratified, and if not, they would have to pay out of their own annuities. The United States further agreed to the said tribes. In the course of the next summer, the additional sum of $26,000 would be paid to them in goods, and another $20,000 was to be paying off their debts incurred by the natives. This too was paid off by the government. The treaty allowed to the native chiefs 8 laborers to work 3 months out of the year, every year. $2,000 for the support of education. Annuity would be paid in the sum of $25,000 as long as they still existed as a tribe and did not give up their federal rights. 9 chiefs of the tribes represented that day were furnished 1 wagon, 1 yoke of oxen, and a house not to exceed $600. Head of cattle and 200 head of hogs, 2,000 pounds of iron, 1,000 pounds of steel, and 1,000 pounds of tobacco. In Article 7 of this treaty, it states that the Miami tribes shall enjoy the rights of hunting upon their land conveyed so long as the same shall be the property of the United States. So all this sounds pretty good, doesn't it? The version of which I just shared with you is what we know to be exact documentation taken straight out of our history books of almost 200 years. But there is a flip side to the opinions of the treaties. The Potawatomis were loud in their demands for land and threatened to wipe out Miamis in their existence, but finally agreed to accept the certain gifts and retired north of the Eel River. By these treaties, all Indians who did not receive special grants were to move west of the Mississippi. Many of these Indians did not have any say in their negotiations. And when the time came for them to move, they did not want to give up their lands. They wanted to stay. This was all they knew. Their heritage was here. Their deceased were here. They were expected to leave it all, forget it, go. Start over. To intermix with new tribes, perhaps where new hostilities would form out west, they had no idea. Would they be welcomed into their new world? Soldiers came to force them onto the canal boats here in Wabash, or they could march overland by foot. Many were hunted down like wild beasts. Many left with handfuls of earth taken from their ancestral graves. The stoical Indian, as we come to know, was crushed and his spirit was broken. He had lost a white man and had to move on westward towards the setting sun. With that being said, a positive note for those of us who have Indian heritage. Your ancestors who stayed behind created a good life. They were prosperous, respected in the community. They carried on tradition and never forgot the hardships that they endured to keep this small bit of earth that was granted to them. They truly are the pioneers of Wabash. After the treaties here in Wabash and the water canals were on every man's tongue, the purchase of land had to be surveyed. The survey for Wabash was made in 1827, immediately following the ratification of the said treaties. Land was subject to purchase, so Township 27, Range 6, as we know Wabash City, was purchased by Jeremiah Cox on the 8th day of February 1827. This consisted of 67 acres. Following the same spring, we purchased another 105 acres. Now we all assume that Hugh Hanna swept through on horseback and emptied his wallet and bought Wabash, and here we are. Well, that's not necessarily true. There were several other purchasers of this land before Hugh Hanna came. Hanna bought his tract of land in 1832 with the help of David Burr. They laid out the original town plat we know today as Paradise Spring. After a short time, he bought out Burr's half for $4,000 and became sole owner of the entire plat. Hanna constructed a house high on top of the bluff overlooking Paradise Spring. It was a modest house, and he could take in the scenery of his accomplishments. In 1849, we became incorporated as a town, and again in 1854, and by the 1860s, we were booming. Railroad, industry, and municipality prospered. That's what put Wabash on the map, and of course, many firsts for our little town. We've grown, and we've continued to add to the treaty grounds. From a flowing spring with thick forests and wild Indians and roaming horses, to water travel and railroads. 175 years is not a long time compared to some towns, but we are proud to call Wabash Town our home. It's a special place, and when we get 200th centennial, maybe we will come up with another first for something even greater than we've already. I know Hugh Hanna would certainly do that.
We'll review what the prizes are, so you can kind of make up your mind about everybody what it gets on it today. We'll start with Liberty Township. That is the family we have. Somerset, and we have James Cook and Wiley's poem, Hills of Somerset. And then we'll go back to the east to LaGrow Township, and at Lincolnville, we have a statue of Lincoln and a folder that talks about early Lincolnville and how he got his name. And then north of there, we go to LaGrow, also in LaGrow Township, and we have a calendar with the beautiful Christmas ornament of LaGrow. Then coming west, we come to Wabash, and we have from the city things have the logo of the city. We have a baseball cap, a mug, and some pencils, some pens, and a pen also with the logo. And from Wabash, go back to the museum while we're in Wabash. We have a history of some of you have read about the 1937 DVD on what Wabash looked like at that time. And we also have a pass for one day to come to the museum.
Family pass.
And then we'll go to Ridge Valley, which is also in Noble Township. And I'm giving you the answers to one of your questions if you're paying attention. We have 2 passes to the Ridge Valley Lions Tenderloin suburb on March 5th. And then from north of there to Pawpaw Township, which is Rowan, we have some napkins from the mill, and little gift packets along with that. And we have a mug from the Scottsdale mill. And then going into Pleasant Township, we have a framed picture of Long Lake when there was a toboggan out there. I never